Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Coming up later in the programme, if there's time, I'd like to talk about laundry and pornographic mugs, believe it or not. There's a couple of lifeboat staff, volunteers actually, who've lost their appeal against dismissal over possession of pornographic mugs. And while I'm afraid I'm still of an age and a generation where I kind of snigger a bit at that sort of thing, I recognise that younger people are probably going to be able to give me a bit of an education as to why these things do matter rather more than people of my vintage sometimes realise. The laundry story involves a mother who likes to hang her laundry outside her house being rather rudely upbraided by an anonymous letter writer, and in response the entire Devon town has started hanging its smalls from the windowsills. I may, if there's time, ask you whose side you're on. We're also going to have another look at video games and crisis in care homes. But Brexit and Russia will be running through the programme like Blackpool through a stick of rock. I'll be joined at 10:30 by Carole Cadwalladr, the multi-award-winning journalist, nominated yesterday, in fact, for the most prestigious investigative journalism award in the country. I'm going to find it very hard to pick a favourite because Amelia Gentleman, the Guardian journalist who, of course, led the line on the Windrush reporting, is up for the same award. Carole's investigations into the Leave EU's associations with the Kremlin and, of course, the role that Cambridge Analytica, founded by Steve Bannon, played in voter manipulation has, dominated the news agenda. But it's been such a slow burner that many of us perhaps didn't get on board soon enough. Speaking of that, there is a journalist called James Patrick coming in later in the programme as well, who pretty much wrote almost a year ago, pretty much predicted everything that's happened in this field in the space of the last few weeks. And because I was... sceptical isn't quite the right word. It was almost sort of pinch yourself territory. This can't be true. I kind of thought we owed him a visit to the studio to talk us through just how he managed to be so prescient. We'll get on with that in a moment. Before that, and I appreciate that a lot of the time I'm whistling in the wind when I say that we'd like to keep things friendly, but I generally mean it. It's only, really kind of violent stupidity that I think we should be attacking with vitriol. In terms of things upon which we can all agree, I'm close to suggesting that no one's got a clue what happened yesterday in the House of Commons, least of all the people that were involved in it. The pendulum seemed to swing so swiftly from one to the other that it was pretty much impossible to tell the time. I think that there are... and the thing is, I can only explain it as I see it, right? And the problem with Brexit, right through it, is that if you are a fundamentalist on the other side of the debate, I think every description I offer of it is going to offend you, even though they're accurate. And I sometimes think, in fact, social media somehow proves that the more accurate my description is, the angrier you get, because it's reality that you're infuriated by now. And of course you get even angrier with me because I've been telling you for 2 years that this was going to happen. So you sort of go, oh, that O'Brien fella with his Brexit nonsense, I hate him. And then, 6 months later, oh God, he was right about that as well. I hate him even more. Another 6 months, and oh no, crikey, they don't need us more than we need. It's why he said that as well. Oh, I hate him even more. I kind of, as a Christian, live in hope that eventually the hate will turn to love and gratitude, because I think what's happened now is that MPs want the right, in the event, and in the interests of peace and harmony, let's call it a theoretical event at this point. Let's not say it's inevitable, even though it is. Let's pretend it's theoretical, okay? In the event of the government arriving in a place where it is absolutely impossible to deny that the country will be worse off according to pretty much every material measure if it continues to seek to leave the European Union. This is what I think happened yesterday. And listen, you can phone in now, 0345 6060 973. Not just if you think I've got it wrong, but ideally I hope I've got it wrong. So what these rebels are doing, and I think there's culpability on both sides of the house, for heaven's sake, but what these rebels seem to me to be doing is saying, this is why I thought Philip Lee's statement yesterday was very interesting. What they're saying is, look, Brexit means Brexit. We're cracking on with it. We understand all of that. But if we reach a point where we can actually see what's on the table, whether it is a no deal or whether it is a deal, if we reach the point where we actually know, I can't just stop using phrases like cliff edge. What would you say when we know what's on the other side, right? Well, okay. So we reach a point where we know what's on the other side of Brexit. MPs are saying, in the event that when we can actually see what's on the other side of Brexit, in the event that it's really, really, really rubbish, could we please have the right to say don't do it? And that is where we are. Astonishingly, a majority in the House of Commons says no. And that is where things get really confusing, because that is where the ideology kicks in. Why wouldn't you want the right to say no to a really, really rubbish destination? I don't quite get that, except, of course, the fact that I used the word material. I said material measures, so everything measurable. Not the stuff that you can't measure, the stuff that is, if you like, emotions, the stuff that is feelings. So when you say, why on earth would you not want the right to stop it in the event of it being rubbish, they say, well, I'm not going to put on a funny voice, at least for the first few minutes of the programme. They say sovereignty, fish, blue passports, control, all of the things that aren't measurable. So I think that's where we are now. And what the rebels seem to think that Theresa May told them yesterday is, of course, you will have the right to sound the alarm, apply a brake, call time, if, when we can actually see what's on the other side, then it's awful. And I think even after all these months, I can't quite believe that it's that simple. Even after all these months, even having spoken to more people on the other side of the argument than anybody else in the country, I still can't quite believe that anyone could cheer for not having a brake on a car heading towards a brick wall, or a car heading towards moving out of a well-developed leafy suburb into a kind of apocalyptic wasteland, into Mad Max territory. And I'm not saying that is what we are doing, but what the MPs were asking for is the right to say no. And I think that if you will, I think that the MPs are a little bit embarrassed to admit it, because they can't really come out with the stuff that you can stick on a placard. They can't really say, I don't care how awful it is because sovereignty, because that involves admitting that it might be awful. And people in the country have started doing that. Ordinary punters have started doing that. They've started pretending that they knew it was going to be awful, and these intangible benefits that get filed under patriotism, sovereignty, control, utterly fallacious, actually, but very, very in the context of the Brexit debate, but very powerful feelings that people who don't like thinking much can really get stoked up about. That's, I think, what happened yesterday. And my starter for 10 this morning, very simply, is that what happened yesterday? 0345 6060 973. Do you feel, whether you're a fully paid up member of the Leave lobby, or whether you're somewhere in the middle, or whether you're utterly persuaded that the country has embarked upon a path to imminent oblivion, is that where we are now? It is simply the case that MPs want the right to say stop if it looks like we're going somewhere really, really stupid. And the government stroke the Brexit lobby don't want MPs to have the right to stop it, even if it looks as if we're doing something really stupid. And I hope I've managed to do... stupid, I'm afraid, is a word to describe deliberately enfeebling and weakening the country. Jacob Rees-Mogg's own investment fund are opening a fund in Dublin at the moment in order to ensure that they have passporting rights after leaving the European Union. I kid you not. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you think you must have imagined or it must have been made up. But the investment fund he co-founded, where he still works part-time, opening a fund in Dublin. You ask him why, if you get the chance. I already know. And you see that, and you know that someone like him would still, even though his own company is making moves to protect their income post-Brexit because they know it will be damaged, even that, he's very much the kind of person who would still come out with sort of 19th century platitudes that he thinks actually are more important than material measures. I think that is what happened yesterday. Do you agree? 0345 606 0973. Philip is in Sandbach in Cheshire. Philip, is that what happened yesterday?
Hello. Actually, I think you're distorting the whole issue of Brexit. We, the electorate, were asked by MPs for a very clear instruction.
I have been over this quite a few times. Can we confine ourselves to what happened in the House of Commons yesterday?
Yes, I think basically those Conservative MPs who are rebelling are traitors. They are betraying.
But they're just asking for the right to vote on something in the event that it's appalling.
No, not at all.
No, what is it then?
They received a very clear mandate.
No, I appreciate that, but we're talking about what happened yesterday, very, very specifically. Here's what I think, Philip, and then you can pick it apart, okay? But let's deal in the specifics. They have posited the notion, and we will keep it theoretical for the purposes of our conversation. They've posited the notion that the Prime Minister is not going to be able to conjure up anything that isn't demonstrably and considerably inferior to our current arrangements. If that becomes clear, they want the right to say, whoa, stop it. And the government or the parliamentary majority and people like you don't want them to have the right to put the brakes on if it becomes absolutely obvious that we're driving into a brick wall. Now, what's wrong with that analysis, do you think?
Yes, because the alternative they're suggesting would keep us in the EU by the back door.
No, but that's not what happened I'm talking very specifically about what happened in the House of Commons yesterday. They say we must have the right to apply the brake if it becomes absolutely obvious that we're driving into a burning building. And you say, no, even if we're driving into a burning building, we must not have a brake.
Yes, I agree, because...
Yeah, I thought you might, actually. Yes.
If the Prime Minister can't...
You did hear the words that came out of my mouth. I said, if we're driving into a burning building, Philip in Sandbach doesn't want us to not only apply the brake, he doesn't want us to even have a brake.
If Brexit means falling off a cliff edge, so be it.
I salute your honesty, Philip. I salute your honesty.
That's what we voted for.
Absolutely. We voted to fall off a cliff edge and to drive into a burning building.
We did indeed.
No, you're right, we did. Is there any way we can prove that you rang in of your own volition, that you're not an actor, that you haven't been put up to this? Because I'm now going to get bombarded with emails saying... oh, carefully handpicked and filtered from all the cowards who haven't got the guts to ring in themselves. Can we prove that you're real?
Yes.
How?
I'm actually a Brexiteer.
Well, I know that, Philip, because I speak to people like you every day, but other people aren't quite as honest as you are, and they still think that there's an intelligent analysis of the stuff you've just said.
I stood for UKIP 4 times
there you
as
go.
a candidate.
You see?
I'm an ex-UKIPper.
Bingo. The real deal. What did you vote for? We voted for pain and oblivion. And just talk me through the positives, the things that when I put on the scales that we're going to be poorer, that we're not going to be able to trade with the largest single market in the world, that we're going to be damaged. The outgoing head of the CBI says that large parts of the car industry today are going to go extinct if we don't stay in the customs union. So I put all that on the scales on this side, all the measurable materials.
You haven't mentioned immigration.
Exactly that. So you put on the other side the stuff that really makes it all worthwhile. Go.
Immigration is the greatest threat that's faced us.
Yes.
Since the Second World War.
It is.
Mass immigration.
Absolutely.
Mass immigration leads to third world ghettos.
It does. Yes.
And that's creating the enemy within.
Right, you are.
That's why.
Yes.
That's why we voted to leave.
It is. Yes.
It was a clear
ghettos and the enemy within. Yes.
And
so you're talking about ghettos of continental European people, like sort of Little Venice.
The open door to Europe is also an open door to the rest of the world.
But it isn't, though, is it?
What do you mean it isn't? We've had 20,000 Somalis come to Britain via the Netherlands.
Right. And how many of them are in Sandbach?
Oh, Sandbach is 98% white British.
Well, I suppose...
So my neighbourhood, fortunately, hasn't yet been affected.
No.
But around the southeast,
yes,
what you have essentially are
cesspits.
Third world cultures.
Do you know where? Because I'd quite like to go. I live in the southeast. Do you know where they are?
London is the worst example, obviously.
But I'm actually in the middle of London at the moment, and you're in Sandbach, and you're telling me that what I can see out of my own window is what is it, an illusion?
In most London boroughs...
Well, go on, talk me through which ones.
In most London boroughs...
Well, go on, talk me through which ones have you been to?
Like Lambeth, etc.
Lambeth?
Etc.
Where the Archbishop of Canterbury lives?
Whites are actually in a minority.
In a minority?
So in a minority. That's a great threat to social stability and...
It is, but you know that the European Union contains no countries that are not majority white.
That's not the point.
What is the point?
The point is where you've got these large immigrant ghettos who are living
like in Lambeth
within their own cultures,
of French people and Italians and Spanish moral framework.
We end up with social with chaos,
right,
and a lack of social cohesion.
We do a lack of social cohesion. What does cohesion mean, Philip?
It means neighbourhoods coming together and communities coming together.
As long as they're not brown.
Subscribing. I happen to be an East African Asian myself.
Of course you do, Philip. Of course you do. And do you live in a ghetto?
No, I've chosen to live in a town that's 98% white British.
Right, you are. And are you the enemy within?
I'm an assimilationist.
Can you prove that you're not the enemy within, Philip?
A few of us, James.
Prove it, Philip.
To assimilate.
A few of us have chosen to assimilate. And there you have it. Just for the record, you are 100% real, Philip. And you've rang up entirely of your own volition, and you're not an actor or a stooge or anything like that. You're a full-time UKIP candidate. Am I right or am I right?
I stood 4 times for UKIP. I'm no longer a member. I'm an ex-UKIPper.
Okay, mate.
I stood 4 times for UKIP.
Have a great day. It's 21 minutes after 10. Well, I'm getting a lot of noise from Lambeth. Apparently there are Portuguese ghettos where practically the only food you can buy is pastel de nata. So, Philip possibly had a point. Be joined by Carole Cadwalladr in about 10 minutes' time to discuss some of her journalism. We'll just be discussing the journalism that's won her countless awards and a nomination for the Paul Foot Investigative Journalist of the Year Award. Coming up later in the programme, we'll have to wait and see. I'm wondering whether the analysis I offered, I think Philip agreed with it. It doesn't matter how awful it is. They don't want Parliament to have the right to put the brake on because, in his view, the country is full of Somalis. A real person. It's not funny, I know a lot of you are laughing. An awful lot of people on the other side of the argument are a bit confused at the moment because that is who you're in bed with. That's who you're in bed with. Ian is in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say? No, Ian's busy. Hassan's in Slough. Hassan, what would you like to say?
I just had to laugh at the last caller.
It's not funny, though. It's not funny.
It would have been fun if it wasn't so funny. He stood...
It would have been funny if it wasn't so funny. What sort of nonsense? What sort of word salad is this? Go on.
I'm trying to stoop to his level, you see. He stood 4 times for UKIP. I stood 5 times as a Tory. I'm not a Somali. I'm a Bangladeshi, and I'm a Remainer as well. I voted as for Remain. From what I understand from what Philip said, if he voted for Brexit in order to stop Somalis coming in,
yes.
Yeah, that really, really makes sense. Really. Now, I, as a Remainer, do believe that Britain is going into a cesspit. Here's what cesspit actually means. It means an economic cesspit. The cesspit he's talking about are the multicultural cesspits. So let's look at the big picture here. I feel I voted Remain because we should be a part of Europe from an economic point of view, but we are heading down into a economic cesspit. But I hope that, as a Remainer, that we are proven wrong.
The analysis I offer of what happened yesterday, and I offer it very reluctantly. Obviously, I wasn't quite expecting to receive such a ringing endorsement from the first caller, but it is the case that if you had to try to explain it to somebody who's just come out of a coma, as they said, we've had a referendum, we voted to leave the European Union, and there is a significant lobby within Parliament and the land, represented in Sandbach by our new friend, but that they absolutely resist furiously the notion that we should have a break, even if it becomes utterly clear that we're driving into a burning building. Is that what happened yesterday? Is that what the rebels are saying? Please, can we have a break just in case? And the government has said no.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because
is it? Because I think that's quite simple. Oh, but you're a former Conservative candidate, so you don't want to portray the government in that way, do you, Hassan?
Well, I mean, there are disagreements within the Conservative Party, yeah. There are disagreements.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So, yes, James, you're absolutely right, but I couldn't possibly say so live on the radio, because who knows, Central Office might be listening, and I might have another crack at the whip one day.
You know what the bottom line is?
What?
I think the whole referendum was a complete mistake. David Cameron did what he did, for political expediency, and I completely understand that. But we won the seats. We're in government, but we have lost Britain. So I think holding the referendum was the biggest mistake that happened. So what happens afterwards, to me, is really immaterial.
Well, not to me. I understand what you're saying, and I'm going to squeeze in Ian in Leeds, but I don't. And then we'll meet Carole, and we'll probably come back to this later in the programme. But I don't just want to confine the conversation exclusively to that poor fella up in Cheshire. Ian is in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
I think, when we talk about MPs having a meaningful vote,
yeah.
I think it seems to me that people want less rights as a nation than they would have as a consumer. I mean, if you bought, let's say, I don't know, a laptop or a mobile phone,
yes,
that didn't work, it kept crashing, etc., what would you do?
I'd take it back to the shop, yeah.
You get an exchange or you get a refund.
Yeah, but what they'd say in the shop is they say, I'm terribly sorry, sir, it's the will of the customer. It's yours, you have to keep it.
Well, this is the situation we're in. People would not accept it as a consumer.
It's the will of the customer. It's the will of the customer, sir. I'm terribly sorry that when you got your box home and opened it, it didn't have a laptop computer inside, but had an apple, an actual fruit apple, rather than a laptop apple. But it's the will of the customer, sir. I'm afraid you voted for it when you took the box out of the shop.
And let's see how long that store would stay in business.
It doesn't matter, though, does it? Because it's almost as if, and I'm glad we can chuckle in, it's almost as if we're playing football with two teams that haven't actually agreed on what the rules are.
Yeah, well, you see...
Goal! I've scored! Donald Trump then comes in saying, I'm going to score some amazing goals, and the crowd goes crazy. They don't even need to see the goals. They just need to hear him say, I'm going to score some amazing goals.
This is what makes me laugh when I hear Brexiters say, well, I knew exactly what I voted for, considering that this is brand new territory. Yeah. No other country has left the EU. This is completely unprecedented.
I know.
There have been no pre-written rules, and yet they say they knew what they voted for.
I got one this morning saying Canada didn't get anything until they threatened to walk away, and you sort of think, I can't even begin to explain to you how stupid that is. Canada is not in the European Union. We walk away, we drive our car to the garage, open negotiations for a new car, and then threaten to walk away after our old car has already been scrapped.
Well, there you are. I mean, it's a crazy situation. It's an absolutely crazy situation. And, just before we go, I'd like to say to Philip in Sandbach, there were ghettos in this country before Britain joined the EU. There were Jewish ghettos. There were ghettos of
I don't know what he means. He doesn't mean that when he says ghettos. He means something that only exists in the imagination of people that write for the fake news sites like Breitbart and Infowars. They're not real. It's not. It's like I said. It's people living in Cheshire in 98% white areas that think places like Hounslow, where I live, is some sort of hell on earth. It's nuts. But how do you help him? Lambeth, the mean streets of Lambeth. 10:31 is the time. I've just heard from Nimco Ali, my friend, and the tireless anti-female genital mutilation campaigner. She's got a special message for Philip in Sambat. She says she's currently at Warren Street, and she, as far as she can tell, she is the only Somali in the region, so he can relax. Carole Cadwalladr on her way to the studio. She's coming by bicycle, so I'm not quite sure when she'll be getting here, but it should be before 11 o'clock to bring us up to speed with the journalism that has seen her nominated yesterday for the Paul Foote Award from Private Eye magazine for investigative journalism. And speaking of Private Eye magazine, shall I read you, because it's just hit the newsstands. I'll read you that thing about old Jacob Rees-Mogg. Hardline Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg has been prominent in resisting the Lord's amendments to the EU withdrawal bill that would keep the UK in the customs union. The Tory MP supports threatening to walk away with no deal if necessary to ensure the UK leaves the EU. However, over at fund manager and his part-time employer Somerset Capital Management, which he co-founded, there seems to be much less equanimity about Brexit. Never mind the Rees-Mogg cliff edge version. Far from excitedly eyeing investment prospects beyond the EU, SCM seems firmly in the Remain camp. Like many city banks, insurers and asset managers, SCM relies on passporting from the UK's EU membership to sell in other EU countries. That could all come to an end with Brexit. EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier insists there will be no special deal, putting city firms at a big disadvantage. Moves to Paris, Frankfurt, Luxembourg and Dublin can get round that problem. No doubt this is why SCM has launched a new investment fund based in Dublin, a major fund management centre, even though that means submitting to Irish EU laws and regulations. So just attempting to nail down what happened, that kind of plays into my analysis of what happened in the House of Commons yesterday, in that the rebels, as they've become called, are simply seeking to have a break if it becomes clear that we're driving to a very silly and dangerous place. But because the Brexit now has become so ideological as opposed to measurable, it's about the feels rather than the facts, significant numbers of hard Brexit people don't want a break. They just don't want a break. There were obviously slightly comic elements to the first contributor who rang in to completely agree with me from the perspective of being a hard Brexiter on the grounds that there are too many Somalians living here. But on a more serious note, Jacob Rees-Mogg's in the same camp. His own investment fund is opening up an operation in Dublin so that it can benefit from the trading arrangements we currently have and which he thinks we should abandon. Because the feeling that you get from leaving is going to be more powerful and more important than all of the measurable material losses. And I think that's all that happened. And I think that we can agree on this. Alan is in Chesham. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I was getting hypnotised by Philip and Sambach. I almost forgot what I wanted to talk about.
Do you know how egotistical I am? I actually now am getting slightly irritated by the fact that everyone's going to be talking about him instead of me today. Carry on.
I think I know what's going on.
Yes.
So I think what happened yesterday with the deal that Mrs May put forward to Grieve and the other rebels, let's call them the Rebel Alliance, was such that she could avoid angering the Brexiteers. Because the Brexiteers' key position is that they will do what Rees-Mogg suggests and walk away if they have to. So if we ended up with a situation where we'd already put in law, I mean, I'm talking about this from being a hard Remainer, and I'm still campaigning to remain.
Yes.
But I can see it from their point of view. If you put it in law, their paranoia kicks in, and they will think, oh, well, the EU will naturally offer us the worst possible deal and bully us into staying because, after all, we can't accept this terrible position that we've already foreseen.
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
Well, I think you're possibly giving them too much credit. I think that for a lot of them, especially the rich ones, which is most of them, isn't it? Most of the very powerful and prominent ones. John Redwood advising investors to get their money out of Britain after the vote while insisting to people in this country that it was the right thing to do. Jacob Rees-Mogg's investment fund, the one that he founded and still puts in a few hours, I think, part-time, shifting an operation to Dublin so that it can avail itself of European Union regulations. The bloke who was in front of the Select Committee yesterday, apparently owning diamond mines and all sorts of interests in gold. All of these people are going to be absolutely fine. So they can actually sort of say, I don't care if the financial situation diminishes. They're happy with a no-deal Brexit because it delivers it delivers an emotional jolt. It's like Viagra for the politically flaccid.
You're also giving them a little bit too much credit in that you're attributing this emotional thrust towards everything they're doing. You know,
what else is there, though? What else is there?
What you just described, and you read out that piece from Private Eye.
Yes.
You know, Jacob Rees-Mogg can have the ultimate cakeism. You know, he can set up an office for his hedge fund investment fund in Dublin, take advantage of everything that's going on within the EU, while at home, you know, the Britain then goes through this period of disruption. I mean, Brexit is like Uber. It's a disruptive technology that is going to just shake up the economy and allow hedge funds to sort of make the money in the gaps that open up. So it's cakeism for them. You know, they get to do exactly what they want, whereas ordinary people who lose their rights to work abroad, you know, don't have the opportunity to sort of like trade across the borders like that.
And the House of Commons yesterday essentially delivered, or what the rebels sought to secure, was simply the right to say stop when what you've just described becomes, if what you've just described became obvious before we actually came out. So if before March 29, all but the most gammony of gammons would be nodding along with you now and saying, yeah, do you know what, I still think it could have gone better. I still think if we'd done this, and this, it would have been the right thing to do. This is what my friends are saying now who voted to leave. They and I think they might be right. You could still, like, imagine a Norway option as they did, and I said, there's no way that these people like Philip are going to go along with freedom of movement. Just trust me on this. But we'll let them believe that it could have been done in a better way. When everybody else, everybody save the most gammony of gammons, recognises what you've just described, what the rebels in the House of Commons were seeking to secure yesterday was simply to establish the existence of a break. And these people, the hard Brexit lobby, the ERG and others, they absolutely furiously resist the idea that there should ever even be a break, and that's where we are. That's where we're breaking it down.
It's just like, I mean, it's exactly the same situation as we found ourselves last week with David Davis threatening to resign because there was going to be he wanted to have an end date, and May said no, there shouldn't be an end date. You know, he wants there to be absolute clarity.
Yes.
Right, and you know, they will not accept this sort of like fallback position where we, you know, act to protect ourselves.
And that's where you'd hope, and I suspect it's a forlorn hope, but that's where you'd hope that everybody would sort of just pause for a moment, wouldn't you? Say, well, look, if we've got a break, it doesn't mean we're going to use it. But and you hear somebody say on live radio, yes, I want to carry on driving into that building, even if it is on fire. And you sort of think, well, you've got the whole country in the car with you. Why would anybody not just want the existence of a break? And that's when you come back to the psychodrama of enemy territory. They're our enemy. They're our enemy. We've got to get away from them. And that's the bit that I think, even if we stayed online talking about this every day for 10 years instead of just 2, people like you and me are never going to quite be able to understand that mindset, are we?
No, you're absolutely right.
I don't think we should stop trying.
No. Well, everybody should get out on June the 23rd and March.
Yes, I mean, this is the people's vote, the big march that's mooted for June the 23rd. We'll talk a little bit more about that as it looms ever closer. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Of course, another one, the fellow, one of the big backers of Brexit, Crispin Odey, another hedge fund tycoon, has taken out more than £500 million of so-called short positions on some of Britain's biggest firms, implying that he expects a poor performance from them after Brexit. People aren't going to make a huge amount of money. Ordinary folk, that dreadful phrase, like me, don't really understand how you make money out of things going badly. But it is just a bet, isn't it? You put a bet on a share price. If it goes down, you win. And he's got 500 million quid's worth of his investors' money bet on things going badly. He, of course, was a prominent Brexit backer, just as Jacob Rees-Mogg was, whose investment fund are now opening up in Dublin because they need to have an outlet under which European Union passporting rights are retained. But, you know, and it's not even funny anymore, is it, when I go, fish? Lots to get through today. I can't criticise you, Steve, because it was my analogy, but this just, mate, I've got no idea what this means, mate. We have a break, James. We have a government that we elected to apply the brakes if necessary. What you want is a dual control brake, so this isn't about you wanting a break, it's about you not trusting the government to use their brake if necessary. I think you're right, but there's something in the phraseology that seems a little a little mean. So I don't know for 100% certainty that you are right. 10:49 is the time. Carole Cadwalladr, the award-winning journalist, is with me in the studio now. I'm very glad you managed to get into the studio unmolested, Carole. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you here. And you are here to talk us through the reasons why you have just been nominated for the Paul Foot Award for Investigative Journalism over at Private Eye. And it is to do with the links between Leave EU, the Kremlin, and Cambridge Analytica. But I'd like, if we can, to begin at the very beginning, because I followed it perhaps a little more closely than many. And I have to confess to you, there have been a couple of occasions where I've wondered how you carried on, where there's so much scepticism in the industry, let alone, I know you were on Mar and that Isabel Oakeshott person accused you of chasing unicorns while she was in possession of documents that suggested at least some of what you were saying was demonstrably true. What are you made of?
The thing is that I've just had facts on my side, so that's been the sort of the thing that I've just relied upon, really, which is that sort of all the takedowns of me are political. You know, I get this sort of it's a Ramona conspiracy. And, you know, that's. I mean, I'm not interested. I mean, I very much keep away from the kind of like, this is Remain, this is Leave.
You don't
this is
have
the
a
law. This is the law. This is the law.
Right.
Well, I keep very much a kind of like there's a definite separation.
Yes.
That's, you know, what I'm chasing is breaches of electoral law, breaches of data law. You know, coordination between campaigns.
All of which is still denied by the people that you've investigated.
Yes, all of it's still denied. Although there's now multiple. I mean, I can run through it. There's multiple investigations by multiple bodies. It's a car crash. It's an absolute car crash of potential law breaking. It's. I was going to use a ruder word then.
Well, don't, because we are live.
Yes.
When did you get the first whiff of rat?
The first whiff of rat came very early on, and that was, I wrote, it was sort of the week after Donald Trump was elected, and I started looking at fake news, and I was writing this piece about Google, and I discovered, I was talking to this academic, and we were talking about the ways that information was being manipulated on the internet. And he was freaked out, and I was freaked out, because we both found this kind of like really disturbing content. And he said, oh, there's this company, Cambridge Analytica, you know, which worked for Trump and it worked for the Leave campaign. And, you know, what they do is they can use these kind of far-right sites to embed cookies, follow you around the internet, track your movements and everything about you, and then target you with this kind of personalised propaganda.
Just while you were cycling here, we took a call from a fella in Cheshire who proudly described himself as living in a 98% white area, but is utterly terrified of Somalians who have come here on Dutch passports. That's the kind of story that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, actually, because in fact, I can go one step back and I can say, on the day that the referendum result happened, I happened to be on my way to Wales for another story. I'm from Wales. And they said, go somewhere and, you know, do a report for us. And I was kind of thinking, where shall I go? And I ended up going to Ebbw Vale. And I went to Ebbw Vale because of the sort of Aneurin Bevan connection.
Yes, of course,
it's kind of classic, you know, Welsh Valley's heartland. And it was such a gobsmacking thing because Ebbw Vale is like this distressed old steel town which has been rebuilt from the ground up by EU money. So it's got these gleaming, like, FE college there. It's got a new railway station. It's got a new motorway. It's got a new railway line. It's got new sports facilities. And it's all everywhere around town. It's like built by the EU, supported by the EU.
9 of the 10 poorest regions in the EU are in the United
And yet,
Kingdom.
when I went round town, everybody, and it's also got really low levels of immigration. I mean, there's a few Poles who work in the factory, and that's it.
Yes.
But everybody, when I was asking them what the reasons were, they told me it was immigration. And what was really fascinating to me, okay, I'm from Wales.
Yes.
My cousins are big, like, with solid Labour, you know, voters from Swansea. And my cousins were Leave voters. But it was this thing that my cousin Richard, he would never read, as he would say, at the Tory press. He took the piss out of me for years because I used to, sorry. He took the mickey out of me.
We had Peter Jukes on earlier in the week, and he had a potty mouth as well.
He took the mickey out of me for working with the Daily Telegraph because the thing is that the Tory press, as he calls it, has no traction in Wales.
Yes.
And yet, when I was in Ebbw Vale, everybody was giving me these lines, which are straight out of the Mail and the Sun.
Right.
And I was like, oh, this is really curious that these messages have completely got through.
Yes.
In an area where they just wouldn't have that before, you know, and particularly when there was like local press and, you know, it was people stuck to their sort of tribal.
And this was all coming through there.
And
social media.
that was the first thing which
Right.
started me thinking about.
How have they received these messages? How has this bloke in Ebervale or this bloke in Sandbach ended up convinced that there's an imminent invasion of Somalians that is somehow linked to the European Union membership?
You know, there's this guy on the ground standing in front of his all-weather football pitches. It's a tiny town. It's a tiny town with these amazing facilities. And he was sort of like, well, you know, the thing is, what's the European Union ever done for us? And I was like, well...
And it was all there.
And I was like, well, do you honestly think that, like, Boris Johnson, because that's who we were looking at then, you know, that if there's a Tory government, that they're going to look out for you more than Europe has. Europe has funneled this money into these distressed areas of Britain in a way which a Conservative government just wouldn't have. And that was one of the sort of first things I started thinking about.
You highlight some appalling flaws in the Remain campaign, actually, don't you, when you point this stuff out? The fact that these messages hadn't got through in the run-up to the referendum, despite the evidence being in front of people.
You know why, James? Because the more I look at it, it's because they did stuff legally. I mean... Well, they did stuff, certainly, which hasn't been challenged by investigators.
All allegations of illegality and criminality have been denied and continue to be so, but we shall watch this space. So then you started digging. Then you started wondering how people like your cousin had ended up being fed an almost unleavened diet of often fake propaganda.
Was just before the American election, so just before, the week before, I was like looking at all these weird stuff which was going on. And I thought, oh, God, isn't this interesting? You can see, like, technologies... In the way that I'd just been at this conference in San Francisco, tech conference, and it was called Tech Crunch Disrupt. It was all about, like, disrupting. Everybody was disrupting something. You know, like the way the media industry has been disrupted, and the way the music's been disrupted. Everybody at this conference was like disrupting. You know, like they're all trying to disrupt all sorts of things. And I was just sort of and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, oh, this is really interesting. It's like technology is disrupting politics here, isn't it? And then I sort of Googled it, and I was like, oh, nobody's written about this. And so I just wrote a little opinion piece before. And then we had, and it's because if you disrupt politics, of course, you disrupt democracy. Yes. And that's the basic problem. That's what's happened. So everything we saw...
Because an informed electorate is a prerequisite of anything close to democracy, and a completely misinformed deliberately misinformed
fundamentally, what we have now is absolutely undemocratic, and I can say that across all spectrums of what's happening in politics, because it's happening in darkness. So the whole thing is being mediated by these tech giants, okay? These adverts are going through the servers of Google and Facebook, and we have no idea what goes on inside them. They are absolutely unaccountable by law. And
because the technology has galloped away and the law has been left behind, it's not a conspiracy or deliberate. It's just a failure to keep up.
Exactly what it is. So the tech giants have come along, technology which has been so kind of like enabling and empowering for all of us, and a wonderful thing. And we all sat back for a few years and went, "Isn't this amazing? God, this new Apple iPhone's like fantastic."
Yes.
And maybe we're all going to come together and the crowd will cure cancer. and then we forgot that maybe there are ways which this same technology can be used for circumventing laws and regulations that fundamentally were established in the 19th century. So our electoral laws, okay, in the 19th century, there were lots of people running around, and they'd just like sling around money and, you know, get people drunk, and that would be how you win an election.
There's a pub around the corner. It's not a pub anymore. It's a Wagamama now. But the Intrepid Fox, who was a politician who was famous for bribing voters with beer.
Exactly.
That's why they brought in these laws.
That's why they brought in these laws.
And they're the ones that still apply.
They had a sort of set of terrible elections, which were, you know, and they were like, OK, we've got to do something about this. And we haven't yet reached that point. That is literally what is happening now across the world, particularly in Britain, because in America, they don't bother controlling money in their elections. They've lost that battle, whereas we do. This is the way we keep people straight. That is absolutely the bedrock of everything. And we have no way, there is absolutely no way now of controlling money that goes into our elections.
You'll stay with us for a little longer.
Yeah.
We'll take some news. Phone lines are open. Is there anyone that you'd refuse to talk to on principle if they were minded to ring in?
No, bring it on.
Absolutely anyone involved in the story at all?
Bring it on. No,
yeah?
I don't think if anybody...
I just want to clarify.
Yeah. It's a good clarification.
03456060973 is the number needed for anybody involved in the story who would like to pick up on anything that Carole has said. The time is approaching 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and joined for another 15 minutes or so by Carole Cadwalladr, the Observer journalist, who has been leading the line on the alleged links between the Leave campaign, Cambridge Analytica, the data company founded by Steve Bannon, also, of course, the founder of the fake news website Breitbart. And what's the third line of it?
Kremlin.
And the Kremlin.
The Kremlin.
There we go.
Let's not forget them.
What intrigues, and we'll move on to, we'll get on to that before 1:15, but what I think you're very good at, and I'm very bad at, is recognising how sophisticated the operation is, so you can explain how voters have been manipulated without sounding as if you're condescending to them or describing them as stupid. I need to learn from you.
Nobody's stupid. I think that's a complete red herring.
Yes.
This is, you think that the smartest people in the world with the sort of most advanced technology, a really, really deep understanding of human psychology, this all come together to kind of create ways of just nudging us. That's all it is. It's like the way it's identifying people. It's using very sophisticated things. So, because all they had to do in the referendum was there's no point in trying to target, hardcore Remainers, and there's no point in targeting hardcore Leavers. You're just trying to find there's a tiny sliver of people in the middle who are undecided, who actually just were open to hearing the arguments.
The two results, the referendum result and the American presidential result, were all about the margin, weren't they?
It's a tiny margin, that's all it is. And, Dominic Cummings, who is the strategist for the Leave campaign, says this, it was it was a matter of 700,000 people waking up that morning and just having a different feeling.
Yes.
And that was why, what they did in the Leave campaign, it was all about... He called it the Waterloo, was their name for it. And he saw himself as Bismarck in a way.
He has written extensively about this. You're simply reporting what he has said.
Yes, this is very helpful because Don Cummings would absolutely tell you this. And what they did, they held back, and this is why our spending
Should just
rules...
stress the phone lines are open for Dominic Cummings as well. 0345 6060 973. No screening, filtering, or refusing to take calls from anybody involved in this story on this programme. Carry on, Carole.
So this is why our spending laws are so crucial, because it's really the last... This thing of the last week, the last days. So Vote Leave held back the majority of their budget to the last week, and then the majority of that to the last 24, 48 hours. And then it was all about, you'd spent all this money, you'd sunk all this costs into, data. This is the heart of it. And you've built a kind of data machinery, you've identified these people, and then you just open this fire hose of personalised propaganda. And you drench people in it. So it would not just be adverts on Facebook, it would be on Google in your feed. They also knew where you lived. It would be billboards outside your house. They were even doing clean graffiti on the streets. I mean, it was just it was absolutely 360, around. And we all kind of, I'm totally swayed by. I'm easily targeted online because they sort of if you're on something and they show you, I think, oh, that's a nice dress. How do they know I'd like that? Yes, I do quite like that. Maybe I'll buy it.
It does, and it's the same. I mean, it sometimes seems clumsy because you've already bought a trampoline and you spend the next 6 months having trampoline adverts pop up on your Facebook page. But you're describing the people who are the geniuses of the markets, of the sector.
Exactly.
This is a question that invites you, I think, more into the realms of speculation than reporting. But what was in it for them? So most roads seem to lead back to Robert Mercer, the American billionaire, and Steve Bannon, the founder or the former head man of Breitbart and the Donald Trump's chief of staff. What's in it for them? Or what was their motivation to...
Well, so this is, and I'm just going to quote, I don't have to make any allegations here, I just quote Andy Wigmore, he's the spokesman for Leave.
But he, of course, has a wonderful defence, which became clear in the select committees yesterday, is their defence is, oh yes, but we do actually tell a lot of fibs.
Well, they had no reason to fib at this stage.
Okay.
They'd won. And there was no, this was way, way, way back ago. It was over 18 months ago. And they'd just been at Trump's inauguration. They'd had a fabulous time. Andy was the one who took the pictures of Farage in front of the Golden Lift. He was flicking through his phone and showing me that. So there was no reason to fib at that point. And he just laid it out. And he said, because I was trying to figure out this thing about whether Cambridge Analytica had worked for Leave EU or not. Because
in the book, The Bad Boys of Brexit, they state repeatedly that Cambridge Analytica did work for...
Oh, of course, yeah.
But now they deny any employment? I think you found...
No, now they've conceded it. So we went into this... We went... What happened was... First of all, they said it. It was all out there online. It was in the book. We knew it.
Yes.
And then what happened is, after this conversation with Andy, I printed an article which said this was like potentially illegal because they hadn't declared it.
Right.
And also, if it was given to them for free by Robert Mercer, then that's an impermissible donation, and that's a foreign billionaire interfering in our democracy, and that's also potentially illegal. So it was only then they went, oh yeah, no, actually they never worked for us. And so then we had 18 months of denials going, no, they never worked for us. And then we had like a whole lot more evidence come out. So Brittany Kaiser, this woman worked for Cambridge Analytica, she left the company and brought forward a stash of documents and proved that she'd done all this work for them, and they'd taken UKIP's data and they built the backbone of the whole data operation. And then what was great was then we found the invoice. So we published that in the Observer.
Yes.
And
£41,000. Off the top of my head.
And Aaron yesterday in Parliament acknowledged that he paid that invoice, not directly to Cambridge Analytica, but he paid it to UKIP. So we know the work was done, we know it was paid for, and we know it wasn't declared.
And if Aaron wants to deny any of this or
but
challenge...
he admitted it all yesterday in Parliament.
I appreciate that, but I'm just reminding that the lines are open, not just for today, of course. Any statements or contributions, refutations, I'll read out in full on the programme as and when they arrive. And now we move to Russia.
And now we move to Russia.
I still don't know what was in it for them, though. I can understand, I'm a great believer in Putin's desire just to run any sort of interference on Western stability and democracy.
And he said, he said when he was talking about the Trump campaign, he was talking about Brexit, he said, that we just had we had the same aims. We all had the same, it was why wouldn't we help each other? What Trump was trying to do in the States and what we were trying to do in Britain, it was part of the same...
But what's the end game? What's the goal? I'm still confused. I don't want to give away a book I'm working on, but there is a line in it that I use repeatedly saying, so I still don't know what they think they want.
It's
2018. I still don't know what they think.
One thing I'd say to you in the chaos of wartime, people make money, don't they?
Usually,
when law and order breaks down and the sort of civil society breaks up and our structures don't work and the regulations, then there are people who can find that. So it's the same sort of thing. It's like what Robert Mercer does with his hedge funds. He makes global instability is great for like hedge funds. You make money out of that. Because the markets jump around and all sorts of things happen, and the same for when Britain pulling out of the European Union, that's going to create all sorts of opportunities. Andy and Lord Ashcroft, one of his kind of great friends,
the man that was co-writing the book that Isabel Oakeshott was supposedly
the man, who's right, and
keeping
also
the Russian information.
Yes, and the man who's co-writing the book and who had
more than welcome on this programme, Lord Ashcroft. As always, I've been saying that for a couple of weeks now.
Yes, it'd be great to have.
I'm sure he will.
I'm really curious.
Stand-up guy.
Can I just talk to you a little bit about this? Because the book that Lord Ashcroft and Isabel Oakeshott were writing, it's about Russian hybrid warfare. So Russian hybrid warfare, an explanation. It's this sort of traditional warfare is where you get your tanks out and you go and invade a country. Hybrid warfare is where you launch operations online. So it's a war of propaganda in the airwaves. And this was so Lord Ashcroft, him and Isabel had been out in Ukraine, and they'd embedded, for example, with soldiers there. So an amazingly interesting and brave thing to do.
Absolutely.
But they were also preparing this chapter about how Leave EU, Nigel Farage, Isabel's friend, and Andy and Aaron had all these undisclosed relationships with
the Russian ambassador.
And what perplexed me and what I said to Isabel on Saturday morning when I was imploring her to bring this thing public, I said, Isabel, how can you be writing a book on Russian hybrid warfare when withholding this information is literally colluding with Russian hybrid warfare? And she said, her defence is, she said, we were always going to make this public, but Lord Ashcroft wanted to wait till after the party conferences in September.
And she also wrote that Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore had been, I think the phrase she used was tools of the Kremlin for 2 years. So there's been a falling out there, presumably.
That's Aaron on Saturday night.
Right.
So on Saturday night, after Aaron gave the story, I sent Aaron an email setting out every single allegation on Friday, very carefully, because we do this, we're very careful, responsible, ethical reporting at The Observer. And so I laid it out in detail what the allegations were, and then Aaron, and I gave him a deadline, 5:30. Aaron emailed later, and he said about 8 o'clock, and he said, I didn't pick the email up, and I need more time. I need to get to my office computer. And we were like, so anyhow, we had fundamentally, I kept going back to him, and I was saying, sorry, Aaron, you kind of can't remember if you colluded with the Russians, and you need to check your office computer. I said, oh, you can't remember? What? So sorry, you need to check your diaries. Remember if you met the Russian ambassador more than once.
Which was the previous claim.
Yeah, the previous claim. He's been on record all, for the last 2 years. It's the one boozy lunch. And he told the Electoral Commission that. One boozy lunch with the Russian ambassador. And sorry, I forgot where I was.
Well, now we know that there were more, and that's what came out in the documents that were being withheld.
And that's the documents that we were preparing to publish. Yes,
and we're pretty much up to date. That's where we are now. So, what happens next?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting.
Say that
what does it mean? What does it mean when the main funder of Brexit is being offered sweetheart deals by the Russian ambassador? Oh yeah, so this was what Aaron rang me.
Which he states he didn't accept. There was some talk about him investing in gold mines.
But very interestingly, Damien Collins, who's the MP who's leading the fake news inquiry, put out a statement yesterday in which he and 10 other MPs in Parliament, they reviewed what Aaron had told them yesterday, and they've called him a liar. So it's just like fundamentally problematic. We've got the main funder of Brexit. Who has lied about his meetings with high-level government officials.
Or could have forgotten.
So the other thing I have to tell you, which I really want to make clear, is that the Russian ambassador is not any ambassador, OK? This is the thing that makes it really interesting. Ambassador Yakovenko, and it's very interesting, the Russian embassy haven't come back to me. They usually troll me on Twitter relentlessly, and they've been quiet, which, could make one nervous. Anyway, the Russian ambassador, Ambassador Yakovenko, was named in a document unsealed October the 30th last autumn. He was named in the indictment of George Papadopoulos. So this was part of Mueller's investigation. And what Mueller had found out, and was really clearly stated in this document, is how London was like a real focus of his inquiries. It was London where George Papadopoulos had his meeting with the Australian diplomat. It was London which was where the brokerage between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign was happening. And Ambassador Yakovenko was in there as this high-level contact and communication bridge between the Trump campaign and between the Kremlin. And this is the person who, as you say, it appears was courting Aaron. I mean, I think that's the way to put it. I don't think Aaron went running to the Russian embassy. They targeted him, and,
Well, you can't blame him for going.
No, you can't blame him for going. Why not? I would. If the Russian ambassador invited me to come and visit, I would definitely go. And in fact, I've written to him a couple of times and asked for an interview, so I'd love to go and visit.
I'm sure he's listening. There you go, Your Excellency. If there's a +1, I'd be quite keen to accompany Carole as well. Thank you. Will you come back next time there is more
absolutely
revelations to report? Congratulations on the nomination for the Paul Foot stuff. Your mantelpiece must be getting quite crowded.
Oh, well, no, it's...
What I found weird, and we're out of time, so this is very much just me personally, what I found weird is that while there was quite a lot of scepticism being directed at you from some of the established media, you kept winning awards that were being voted. It was almost as if they weren't printing stuff in support of you, but when they got the chance to vote for you to win, because I was at I lost one of them. I was losing one of them at the British Journalism Awards while you were winning, and it struck me that meant that obviously in private a lot of people in the profession thought you were doing God's work, but in print they somehow were constrained from saying so. Or have I gone a bit nuts?
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, it is interesting because I mean. I don't know.
Should have quit while we were ahead. I'll let you think about that. We'll talk about it next time.
Thank you. I mean, it's like the support, actually, I have to say, somebody said to me, it's because I've made so many enemies in this. I have many enemies I've made in this. But I've also, like, made a lot of friends, and, like, the support and I get online has been amazing. And so I'm really, really grateful for that. And that's been, you know, that has helped sort of push the story forward. So, like, all these people who've done that, you know, they've been really, they're helping the story.
And a lot of support for you on social media here today as well, including one fellow who's just confessed to having a crush on you. Make of that what you will. Carole Cadwalladr of
Is
the...
it Nigel?
Is
it Nigel? We haven't chatted about Nigel. It's Nigel.
Next
we'll
time.
talk. We'll chat another time.
Next time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Gosh, fascinating. It's in many ways worse than I thought. But we will keep an eye on Carole's astonishingly fruitful work with regard to these so-called data operations and links between Leave campaigns and the Kremlin and Cambridge Analytica. I'm going to allow myself a little bit longer to invite you to analyse what I've said, and then we're going to find out a little bit more about Russian hybrid warfare, oddly. It's almost as if we planned it today. I didn't know that was going to pop up during my conversation with Carole. I didn't know it lay behind the decision to withhold from the public evidence of attempts by the Kremlin to woo senior members of the Leave EU campaign. But there's an author called James Patrick who's been writing about Russian hybrid warfare for over a year, way ahead of the game, and he's joining us in about 20 minutes by coincidence. So hold on to your hats. Back to the question of the break. All I'm interested in is that what happened yesterday? That Conservative rebels sought to secure the ability to put the brakes on if, not when, we can keep this friendly today, if it becomes absolutely clear that we're going to be considerably worse off after leaving the European Union than we are in it. So this is, I think, what was in the between the lines of Philip Lee's resignation statement. So that's what they were trying to do. And the furious rejection of that, the suggestion that there can be no break, not just that we will never put it on, there cannot be a break. Well, that dismays and confuses me. Why not? And then there was one article, I think in the Telegraph, by a Leave cheerleader that said it doesn't matter what happens, we have to get over the line. And I think that's the mindset that's in place now. It doesn't matter. There's still an argument out there that people will be cross if they don't get the Brexit that they voted for, but nobody is going to get the Brexit that they voted for. People voted to leave the European Union thinking we could be like Norway. People voted to leave the European Union thinking that we could be like Switzerland. People voted to leave the European Union thinking that they need us more than we need them. People voted to leave the European Union thinking that that we'd still be able to trade with them in exactly the same way that we do now. Absolutely everybody who voted to leave the European Union believed something that has turned out not to be true. So that argument doesn't really wash either until you look at it through the lens of what Carole described, and you wonder what would happen if there was another massive push to persuade people, I don't know, to respond, well, just to mislead and misinform on an industrial scale. What happened yesterday in Parliament with regard to the break? James is in Barnes. James, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, James.
There's no Somalians in Barnes this morning.
Somalis. We have to say Somalis, not Somalians.
Sorry.
No, it's not. It's me. It's my fault. It's Nimco's been. My friend Nimco has been in touch to.
You went to a rotten school, you see. You didn't have.
I know, it's true. It's true. But it's all clear in Barnes, is it, at the moment?
It is, but there's a few Jews in my road, of which I'm one.
Oh.
But, you know, so we're going to.
Is that a ghetto? Is that a ghetto?
They're all in the same road as me, so we're not sure whether that qualifies as a Jewish ghetto yet. But we'll see. Well, I was just going to say, joking aside, is that, you know, I spoke to Mr. Dale the other day, and, you know, all these people that are ex-Brexiters will not hear anything that is a fact.
I'm not comfortable having honourable colleagues criticised on this programme.
No,
you can criticise a dishonourable one if you want, but Ian's a mate of mine.
I'm not criticising him.
Okay.
I think he's I actually have a lot of respect for him, Dale, because even though he holds right-wing views, he's very fair in his. You know, in the way that he puts points. No,
yes.
I'm not. This is not a criticism.
Good. Just checking.
But no. But I'm just saying that. You know, when it's put to people who are Brexiters, forget Mr. Dale, that, you know, this referendum was a consultative referendum. Even Mr. Farage agrees with that. And when the MPs had their vote on Article 50, if they really were exercising the democracy of this country, because 2/3 of them are against Brexit, they should have voted to kick out Article 50, and that would have been that. And I think that they are now, better late than never, exercising a bit of the control of Parliament over government that they should have done then, because they had no business actually voting on party lines then. They should have voted with their consciences.
But they couldn't. You was crushed the same. You remember what the atmosphere was like? It was so febrile. There were still a few sort of...
I understand that, yeah.
And I have sympathy for them. You know, Anna Soubry revealed yesterday that one of her Remain colleagues has 6 armed guards with her on a recent public opinion. We know that there was a court case is still unfolding, but there's been a guilty plea by one far-right individual. I sympathise with them, and you could argue that more honour could have been displayed, but you're right, that would have been the proper reflection of parliamentary democracy, but it didn't happen. Do you think what I've described as happening yesterday is accurate? It is.
I do.
So why are they so reluctant to have a break? Is it because they have to get it over the line even when it becomes clear that it's a terrible idea?
Yes, absolutely, because
that's where I get so confused.
You hear, I mean, you have, even now this morning, listening to Nick, Mr. Farage, in his own words, this is a conspiracy organised by Mr. Soros.
Right.
So Mr. Soros is behind the rebel Tory MPs.
I see. I didn't hear that. I believe you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it defies belief that it's like Mr. Trump. They just come up with anything and say it without any foundation. But I think that they are very much like Brexit means. We voted. This is what the will of the people. But half the will of the people, nearly half the country.
So many people.
Half the people didn't vote nearly for the. And I think that in real democracy is actually taking into consideration what the other half, or the nearly other half, did not want. And I think the MPs are, thank God,
I'm with you all the way until this weird sort of speed bump where I kind of think that there must be lots of people who not yet are perfectly willing to reflect and respect that, but you look at there will come a point where we know what we're going to get, and at that point, why would anybody not want the right to change their mind?
Because they are so. They've put themselves into a corner, James. That's how I feel. And that they are so much in a corner of delusional belief that this is what is right for the country, that it's as if they're in a sort of a belief.
When the delusion can no longer be sustained, when we're actually aware, when we have it properly explained to us in the event of a no deal, what trading on World Trade Organization rules means, when people like the outgoing head of the CBI describing the extinction of the British car industry, when it actually becomes clear, why would they not want the right to change their mind then?
Because you're asking me, you know more. It does defy belief. If this was in a sort of a political drama on television, you wouldn't believe it.
No, you wouldn't.
It's not possible.
No, you wouldn't.
And I think that you wouldn't. And when you hear people, and I won't mention anybody's names,
no, don't,
talking on the radio,
it's awful.
But, you hear them every day talking on the radio, and it's just a law of sense. They go, but there's 89% of the trading world is outside the EU. But, and we...
So that's a new refrain, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, but how can you do deals? How can you get a better deal with Australia, with one country, than 27?
And why does Germany do 5 times more trade with China than we do?
And then you get Brexiteers saying, but look at Switzerland. They do deals with all the world, and they don't have a problem.
It's
well, of
in
course
Schengen.
Maybe not. Yeah, and so I think that they are. I don't think you're going to change their minds, James. I think they are.
Well, then why are they so frightened of the break then?
Because they know what will happen. I think that what will happen, if it's a bad deal, the MPs will vote against it. There is no doubt about that. And I think Theresa May had to agree to that because she would have lost that vote. And if her best mate, Mr. Lee, resigns, on that principle, then she knew she had a big problem, because he's a great friend of hers.
Yes, and it would have focused the mind. James, you've made me late for the news. I'm hearing reports that perhaps some of my colleagues aren't as respectful of me on their programmes as I am of them, but I refuse to believe that Ian Dale would ever have said such a thing on the radio. It's 11:31, where a rather fortuitous alignment of the planets has occurred, because if you were listening to Carole Cadwalladr earlier, giving us chapter and verse on her investigations into alleged links, I have to say alleged, I think... Well, I'll carry on saying alleged, better safe than sorry. Alleged links between the Leave EU campaign, the Kremlin, and Cambridge Analytica. She mentioned that the story she broke this weekend, which involved the human being Isabel Oakeshott having papers supposedly in her attic that proved there had been many more meetings between senior Leave EU figures and Russian diplomats than anyone had previously admitted to. Carole explained that the reason these were being withheld from the public was so that they could be included in a forthcoming book by Isabel Oakeshott and Michael Ashcroft, which will contain a chapter on Russian hybrid warfare. At which point you probably went, what on earth is Russian hybrid warfare? I went, what on earth is Russian hybrid warfare? We'll check the dates in a minute, about a year ago, and the reason why I went, what is Russian hybrid warfare, was because a chap called James Patrick, a former police officer turned investigative journalist, had been writing about it, chiefly in a book called Alternative War, which was about Russian interference in the UK's Brexit referendum and the US election of President Donald Trump. And I am somewhat embarrassed to admit that I didn't quite buy it. I thought it was too huge to swallow. What's happened in the subsequent 7 or so months is that more and more evidence has emerged that what James Patrick was writing about was not only way ahead of the game, but mostly, as far as I can tell, bang on the money. James Patrick joins me in the studio now. I should add that the book Alternative War, the title that you use on there is J.J. Patrick. James, thank you.
That's a pleasure.
And sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. It takes a decent person to apologise, James.
Well, you've encountered a lot of scepticism, haven't you, since you started doing this work? Let's begin at the beginning. How did you end up on this beat, as it were, and just come?
Wow. I was a police officer. I worked as an analyst at Scotland Yard. And I obviously ended up being a whistleblower in a parliamentary inquiry about how the crime figures were being fiddled.
Yes.
And this was back in 2013-14. Caused a big kerfuffle. Lost my career as a result of it. And life has one of those sort of funny ways of stamping on you when you're on the ground. And in the process of getting back up, I accidentally stumbled into an argument with somebody on Twitter about Sweden.
Right.
And disinformation around immigration.
This is people who live in Texas who think they know more about what's happening in Sweden than people who live in Sweden.
Basically, yeah.
Yes.
And it was about these no-go zones and everything else.
Yes.
So I kind of on the spur of a moment, I launched a project which was very quickly crowdfunded, and part of the point of that was to actually go to Sweden and sort of have a look and see if it was true. So I went to Malmo, I went to visit the no-go zones, I interviewed the deputy mayor, one of the local chiefs of police, residents, and nothing was quite as it seemed. So I started to look into the background, and I found the first sort of traces of this Russian involvement and Russian disinformation, and how members of the Sweden Democrats had been infiltrated by a Russian spy in the Swedish parliament. So I turned my attentions towards this topic, and in the midst of it, all the Cambridge Analytica stuff came out. Eventually, I'd started to build up a collection of documents and evidence from various people, including from NATO, about this thing called hybrid warfare, which at the time I was as clueless as everybody else. And it kind of transpires that what it is, it's an asymmetric type of warfare. So it's not traditional bullets and bombs. It's to do with manipulation of psychology, it's to do with manipulation of news, world events, financial markets, economic situations, the diversion of immigration through standard warfare to create narratives, the backing of extreme groups on all political sides. And it's designed to internally destabilise a country.
To what end?
To what end? Russia benefits, and this has always been the hard thing for people to grasp, but in fact it's really, really simplistic. Russia just wants a level playing field, or what it perceives as a level playing field. It wants to be one of the big countries. It wants to be a superpower. But because of years and years of sanction and years of manoeuvres against weapons, its traditional power base has shifted. And internally, there's been an exponential increase in wealth, which has been obtained by this post-Yeltsin fusion of organised crime and the state. And one of the best ways that I've heard it described is that the way that the Kremlin is more accurately reflected now is that it's a criminal organisation with state machinery. And it's just quite simply looking for territory, for finance, and for power. And that actually is really, really simple part of human psychology.
So they would be able to clean their money in the places that have been destabilised. Compete on the world stage, have legitimate sources of income instead of having to have an economy which is based in the dark. Yes.
And people always say things
so
like
that then would involve undermining our institutions, undermining the things that kind of hold our societies together. The simple relationship, for example, with objective truth would be the first thing that comes under attack.
I think the key thing which people have struggled with, it's not magic. It's not something that they've created this secret psychological super weapon. What they've done is they've just studied and they've learned how to exploit us as individuals. They've learned how to find every sort of seam, every fissure, our fears, our desires, and our divisions. And all they've done is they've targeted a wedge and hammered it into each one of those gaps until that's become a fracture, which is quite visible. And if you look at what happened in America with the troll farms and the division and the rise of the alt-right and the way that everything interacted, you can actually see that they were playing all sides of this because they were targeting Black Lives Matter to dissuade voters, to create events, to create flashpoints. And at the same time, they were targeting the alt-right and the neo-Nazi groups. So they've just created this huge void.
So they don't care who wins, they just want a fight.
I mean, the whole concept is chaos is a very, very valuable commodity, especially if it's chaos within a country that you are competing against. Because if it can't respond effectively and it can't outmaneuver you and it can't speak with a united voice, then how can it defend against you? It's really, really simple. And actually, over time, the base level of these asymmetric techniques, which is the psychological aspect, will be replaced further and further. And it may be the case that we all head towards physical conflict, as has happened in Ukraine, because a very, very similar tactic was used over the years in Ukraine, because it was divide, annex, and then belittle, which has continued for years and years and years. And actually, it's very, very difficult, in particular with Ukraine, to get a sense of what is true and what is not, despite the variety of voices. And if you look at the United States, and if you look at some parts of Europe, and if you look at the UK now, you can actually see patterns of that replicating, because what is true? None of us really know what's true anymore. And it's actually terrifying.
Yes. Yes, it is. Just give me a moment to shiver. And what did you find then? Because you've given us, in a sense, where we are now. You stumbled into it by accident. I'd ask what was your skill set that enabled you to dig in the right places, and what did you start finding early on? What was the stuff that made you think, crikey? Because it's an odd mindset that you need, James, to think. Because I'm a journalist by trade all my life, apart from when I was a suit salesman. I'm not a particularly good news journalist, but I do. I struggle sometimes. If everyone else isn't doing it, I think it mustn't count. Yeah. And I've realised over the last 2 years how stupid that is, and it's part of the reason why we've ended up where we are. You must have a very strong personality or a very strong sense of right and wrong, because everybody ignored this story. I know other people are telling me, I told you about this 12 months ago, James. I told you about Vladislav Surkov, the godfather of Russia. And you're right, the people have been talking about it, but you've put your life and soul into the work. Why?
I think within policing, and because of my upbringing before that, I had a very, very rigid sense of right and wrong. And actually, when I started doing the whistleblowing within the police, that's a very, very particular test of character. And it takes a particularly awkward character trait to go against the grain of everything else. And say with the parliamentary inquiry, policing fought against that through the entire time until eventually it was vindicated. So I'd been through that at quite a high level before.
Right.
And once you've done that, there's no base level of that can't be done because people are saying it can't be done. I take it more as a dare now. But in terms
there's a national interest. There's a patriotic. I know it's a much maligned word, but or a dedication to the truth that underpins what you've done.
I think, despite the fact...
Just hold that thought. We're going to take a break and then we'll come back if we may. Thank you. James Patrick will be staying with me until 12 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 10 minutes to 12 is the time. JJ Patrick, the author of Alternative War and one of the earlier canaries down the coal mine of so-called Russian hybrid warfare, is with me. And what's interesting, given that we mentioned some of the scepticism that greeted your early work, is that this forthcoming book by Michael Ashcroft and Isabel Oakeshott is apparently going to contain a chapter on Russian hybrid warfare. So there you have two people very, very much associated with leaving the European Union, very much associated with that side of that political debate. That should be the evidence. Because I was going to ask you, when does the scepticism disappear? When you've got people like you and people like them both reporting on Kremlin-sponsored attempts to subvert stability, subvert democratic norms, then we must be coming close to a point where everyone's going to recognise it's true?
I think so. I mean, by the end of last year, I was fairly burned out by it all and the constant trolling and everything. But it came to the end of year intelligence reports by the government, and even the government had acknowledged the level of the Russian threat, which they often miscategorise as cyber, but they'd started to include psychological threat. So at the top level, people are aware of it. It doesn't get reported as broadly as it should, perhaps.
Because do you know why? Because we don't get it. It's a simple failure of understanding. It's not a failure or it's not a deliberate or cynical or conspiratorial. People just don't get it. It's too big and too complicated.
I think there has been a general failure to put it in bite-sized terms, and we have to acknowledge the fact that society has changed now to a world where people have become used to 140 character bulletins, and everything beyond that is just noise. And it's one of the things which Andy Wigmore has said repeatedly, and he said it again yesterday in Parliament. It's not really about the truth anymore, it's about the emotion. And if people don't have an emotional connection to a complicated topic, then there's no progress, there's no bounce or balance around it, and there's no comprehension. And I think that's part of the problem with Brexit as well, because on the one hand, there were really, really simple messages, which were effectively immigration bad, EU bad. But then if you actually try and explain the complicated side of it, and the complicated side of trade negotiations, and the complicated side of the immigration impact on wages, it doesn't condense. And because it doesn't condense, it can't be accepted as easily. And that is exactly how hybrid warfare works. It takes a simple message and just batters it into your brain until it has the desired effect. And you can't combat that effectively by throwing this huge, abstract, scary concept at people and just go, accept that hybrid warfare is real.
Which is perhaps why people fall apart so quickly on programmes like this, when they seek to actually defend what they think they believe, and it turns out that all they've actually got is a slogan or an emotional feeling that doesn't stand up to even the slightest scrutiny.
I think we've come to a point now as well where those emotions have been played with to a level that it might not be reversible within a generation.
No.
And that is quite a scary concept. And if you look at even the stuff coming out of Parliament last night, within Parliament, it's obvious that politicians have been affected by targeted messaging in the same way as the rest of us. If you look at the allegations of threats to MPs, but again, that doesn't gain traction because it can't. People are overloaded. There's a barrage of of news and fake news, and everything is called fake news and everything is called disinformation, and that's actually the point. It's to bury the truth underneath a mountain of allegations and accusations and
that's where we are.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump being the apotheosis of that process in every imaginable way. And what's fascinating about the response to anything that he does, for example, the North Korean pantomime this week, which obviously everybody hopes leads to something meaningful, but at the moment it's utterly meaningless. All it's done is legitimise a murderous dictator. But what you've described explains why some people who should, I mean, some bright people have fallen for this. It's no mean to suggest that it's gullibility or stupidity, but they respond by just talking about the other side. So everything becomes, well, if Barack Obama had done this, then no, because there's no room for analysis, nuance, or understanding. You just pick your team and then scream until you're hoarse.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ancient art of whataboutery. This,
yes.
And these are actually all staples of Kremlin messaging which go back years, and it's just about the destruction of critical capacity to the point where you will accept the shortest, most simplistic explanation.
Make America great again.
Make America great again. Make Britain great again. Free Tommy. This was on the size of a bus.
Yeah. We're nearly out of time. I recommend the book heartily. Alternative World by J.J. Patrick. You can just tweet, just Google that, and you'll come up with ways to get it. Or you can follow James on Twitter. What's your Twitter address? James
it's J_AMESP.
Okay, say that again.
J_AMESP.
Okay, and I'll retweet that from my account as well. Proof. I mean, what people listening to this who think, well, crikey, it all sounds a bit scary or all sounds a bit dodge, and I don't really buy any of this. What would you point out to say, here you go, look, because I've had odd experiences. I mean, my Twitter's gone nuts in the last 12 months or so, and one of the lawyers associated who's been investigated by Robert Mueller for allegedly meeting up with Donald Trump Jr. She had been tweeting me, my little LBC show. So I sometimes worry about prominence and that kind of thing. But what do you point at as proof?
Okay, I think the sort of the base level that people need to start at is they need to look at and verify the existence of a Russian strategic military book called, off the top of my head, it's The Future of Geopolitics or something very similar, by a guy called Alexander Dugin. It's something the generals have been relying on for a long time, and the basic principles are that the UK should be cut off from Europe, Europe should be fractured, there should be a tripartite axis between France, Germany and Russia, which explains the strategic interests of Russia in those elections as well, and that the US should be fractured and, where possible, should be sort of backed out of the Asia-Pacific region, which, if you look at the strategic manoeuvres, Trump, who is allegedly a sock puppet of Putin, is doing, it makes sense that they're following just a plan. So that's something that everyone can find. I'd recommend going to the NATO website and having a look at their capstone concept of 2010, which relates to hybrid warfare. There's a very, very recent US strategic military paper which is about the future of hybrid warfare, and there is another one.
Adam Curtis is quite good as well,
Adam
isn't he,
Curtis.
on hyper-normalisation.
Also, I'd recommend just a straight reading of the Robert Mueller indictments for the Internet Research Agency, which is the one for 13 Russians, because actually it explains how local activist groups were hijacked by a Russian troll farm based in St. Petersburg.
And in terms of street level, the things that someone listening to this will be able to see on their own Twitter account, what sort of stuff are we talking about? Because you mentioned, and some of this is promoted by fake news sites like Infowars and Breitbart, the no-go zones, the idea that... But what are we talking about? What could somebody go, crikey, that's there you go,
there are these news sites popping up all the time. If you were to take a look at something called usareally.com, that's a really, really good example of what these sites look like, and that one was recently launched by the Internet Research Agency.
Right.
And you will notice across these viral digital sites that their technique is very, very similar.
So when I see, John Smith 104676666654, how likely is it that is a member of a troll farm?
The issue of the troll farm thing is incredibly complicated.
Yes.
I've tried to explain this before.
There's only got 40 seconds left.
Yeah, there's no easy concept to it, but you can look for things like poor English backwards apostrophes is a good one because it comes from Cyrillic keyboards.
Gosh.
But there's just immense amounts to it. It's an incredibly complex topic.
And they don't just go after the people they agree with or disagree with. Because this is what I found fascinating, is the days where my account is trending higher than, top 5 in the country. A lot of that is people who hate my guts. Apparently, a lot of that is just trying to get the chatter, get the negativity out there.
Well, the other thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to use your network centrality, which is a technical aspect of it all, to enhance their own messaging.
Yes,
which is why they target high-profile people.
So that if people reply to, even if I'm ignoring someone,
it puts their message into your network.
So someone will reply to the repliers, and then everything gets amplified.
It's exactly the same way that the targeting used by companies like SCL works.
Got you. I was hoping you were going to cheer me out. James, Patrick, it's been an absolute pleasure, and if you'll allow me, better late than never. I apologise for the final time. It's 12 noon.